This is my son's 1991 Accord 2.2 4-cylinder. Having trouble with a miss about 1800 RPM under a slight load with the brake on and it in drive. Disconnecting the EGR valve vacuum line and disabling the EGR, the engine miss went away, so we knew it was in the EGR system. I looked on the internet, and EGR problems on Hondas V6 and 4 cylinders are very common, and you'll find a lot of tips there, but I hope in this video to show you a lot of things that weren't listed. Having a body slide hammer like this really comes in handy. It's going to be hard for you to do this job without a slide hammer. I'll try to explain to you one way that you might be able to do it without this tool. If you will drill out the EGR passageway plugs, thread them, screw a small stud in it, and then use a socket over that with a washer and a nut, you may be able to draw that plug up into that socket if you follow what I'm saying. That's the only other way I know that you might be able to do this without a slide hammer. I have a smaller version of a slide hammer that I used to remove carburetor plugs, but it was just too light to do the kind of job that this is going to require. The yellow arrows show hoses that carry antifreeze to the two valves shown in this photo. It's actually easier to remove the two valves first and then remove the hoses. If you do this with the engine cold, you won't lose any antifreeze. Remove the PVC valve and hose shown by the orange arrow here, and also remove two vacuum lines shown by the red arrow and move them out of the way. The red arrows show the bolts that need to be removed from these two valves, and the yellow arrow shows a very hard to get to screw that holds a vacuum diaphragm that attaches to the throttle. There are two screws here and very difficult to get to, so I'm going to show you some tools that I use that really made this go a lot easier on removing this vacuum diaphragm. I use this offset screwdriver to break those screws loose on that diaphragm, and then they backed right out with no problem. Here's some other alternatives that you might try too. The top shows a flexible screwdriver with a Phillips bit, and the bottom shows a ratcheting offset Phillips screwdriver. Here is the EGR valve held in place by two nuts. One you cannot see, it's back behind the valve, but the red arrow shows the one that's in front. Also disconnect the vacuum hose at the yellow arrow. I won't go into all the technical jargon about how an EGR valve works and what it is. You probably already know that by now. The red arrow shows electrical connector, and there's a sensor under this that gives the computer the information of the position of the EGR valve. The yellow arrow shows the diaphragm of the EGR valve. When you apply vacuum to the EGR vacuum hose connector on this EGR valve, this diaphragm should move. Exhaust gas goes in at the yellow arrow and is distributed to the intake through the port marked by the red arrow. Here are the two valves that must be removed from this engine, and they're still connected by an antifreeze hose. But you have to remove these in order to get to the plugs to drill them out, and even at that, it is hard to get a straight shot at those plugs. Use a good quality of a sheet metal screw to remove these plugs after you drill a hole in them. Be sure to run your sheet metal screw in all the way through this plug and out the other side so you get a real good bite on it. You don't want to break that off or have it pull out. Some have said to drill and tap this and then use it with your slide hammer, but it's really hard to get a tap in there. I would recommend doing it this way. We'll tap it later. You'll see that upcoming. Here's a close-up shot of the tip of my slide hammer showing the screw and the plug that it removed. The red arrow shows a diaphragm that attaches to the throttle. You can leave that attached, but you need to remove the screws that hold it and swing it aside as shown here. The screws go into the intake at the yellow arrow, and there are the screws. There's two of them that are really hard to get to. The smaller the drill, the better. Shown here is my air drill. This shows the tip of my slide hammer with the screw already threaded into the hole that I drilled. Here's a plug drilled and tapped for a screw, and I'll put anti-seize on both these. The 4 yellow arrows shown here show the holes that go into each port, into each intake port. The 2 ports in the front channel, marked by the red arrows, allow access to clean the passageways into the rear channel, marked by the green, if cleaning is necessary. Okay, bear with me here. For reference, I'm going to call these channel passages. There are 2 long channel passages that you see here with the ports in them. They're side by side with a metal wall between them, shown by the 4 yellow dashes. Exhaust gas flows from the EGR valve in the direction of the blue arrows and then through a port in the wall of the channel marked by green, and then it flows to each port passage marked by the yellow arrows. So the front channel supplies the rear channel. The 4 holes shown here by the yellow arrows increase in size from left to right, and the reason for that is that the pressure as it's coming in on the left is higher. So to keep the distribution equal, the holes that go into the intake, each intake port, must be larger as you go further down the channel. The passageways that clog up are directly under these plugs shown by the yellow arrows, and they're best cleaned by using a drill bit and by twisting it by hand and moving it up and down. Clean each one of those ports carefully, not to remove any metal, just the carbon. After you have drilled all these plugs out, take a vacuum cleaner and vacuum up all the filings, and be sure to suck out each and every port real good. Make sure there's no filings left in there. Then you can blow out and test the flow through all these ports with your air gun. You can buy new plugs at the Honda dealer for these ports, but I'm going to reuse the old ones and tap them and put anti-seize on them and plug them. That way, by having a removable screw, the next mechanic that has to do this job will have it just a little bit easier. Now this hole was almost clear. You can look down through where the plug was. You can see the little hole down in the manifold that goes into the port. On this engine, 2 of the holes were clogged solid, and 1 was partially blocked and 1 was open. Now this one was blocked solid on this particular hole. If all 4 of the EGR valve passageways are blocked solid, then you won't get an engine miss under load. The reason this engine had an engine miss is because 2 of the holes were completely blocked, meaning that the other 2 holes got far more EGR than they're supposed to, and that caused 2 cylinders to miss. If you completely disconnect the EGR valve, you're going to get a check engine light. You may get some spark knock. Severe spark knock is called detonation, and detonation destroys pistons just as if you took a hammer to them. So you need to leave the EGR hooked up so it'll pass the emissions test and not ruin your engine. This hole was open on this particular port. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video.